Shaktikanta Das, you are the alternate governor for India at the Asian Development Bank. You are the Secretary of the Department of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Finance in Delhi. You've also held positions in the state of Tamil Nadu as well as other government corporations. So when we're talking about this whole issue of structural reforms, it comes against a background of very, very significant reforms if they are realized by Narendra Modi. And in particular, you have a need to find jobs. 12 million, is it, a year that you have to have? And also a great deal of money that needs to be spent on infrastructure. I think you've committed something like $32 billion, isn't that right, to do that? So how are you going to do all that?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. I must compliment the President of the Asian Development Bank for fixing this discussion on structural reforms. Because last month, many of us were in Washington when we attended the IMF annual, the spring meetings. And there was discussion. Everybody talked about, the IMF said that we need monetary policy interventions, we need fiscal policy interventions, we need structural reforms. But then there was no further discussion. And I think it's very timely and very appropriate that ADB has fixed a discussion and has invited a few countries to participate in this forum. So congratulations to President ADB for organizing this. Now, talking about structural reforms, in Indian context, the Prime Minister has set the goal of the government as reform to transform. That is the slogan the government has, reform to transform. And in this year's budget, which was presented by the Finance Minister at the end of February to the Indian Parliament, the main theme of the budget, the underlying theme of the budget was Transform India. The main objective of our reform policies, the main objective of our structural reform policies are twofold. First is to make India a low-cost economy. Low-cost economy not in terms of wages, because if you get low wages for your people, that's not a very happy thing to happen. People should get higher wages, people should save more, people should spend more. We are targeting to make India a low-cost economy by way of reducing our interest rates, by way of reducing our tax levels, by way of reducing the cost of logistics and the transaction costs in our economy. For reduction of interest rates, the government has been working with the central bank and the government, the finance ministry and the central bank. We have entered into a monetary policy, a monetary framework agreement under which the central bank has a particular inflation target. And over the 2 years, the inflation, which was earlier in the order of about 10%, has been brought down to about 5 to 5.5%. So that has enabled the central bank to reduce the policy rates. It has also enabled the government to reduce certain government-driven saving schemes where the interest rates were higher. So basically the effort is to move towards a low interest rate regime where money is available at a lower rate to entrepreneurs, to investors to invest. We are also working on lowering the tax rates by moving to a goods and services tax regime. A reduction of corporate tax has also been announced by the finance minister. A beginning has been made in this year's budget. For cutting down on cost of logistics, huge infrastructure on railways, on roads have been announced and have been made over the last 2 years. And to cut down the transaction costs, a lot of process reforms have been initiated over the last 2 years, especially to improve the ease of doing business in our country, the number of forms, the number of applications, the number of licenses, all these things are being cut down. And most of the things are now being made online. The interface between entrepreneurs, between business and government agencies also is being eliminated. The other objective of our structural reforms is to make our economy more efficient and to fill up certain regulatory gaps. Wherever there are regulatory gaps, the effort is to fill up those regulatory gaps and improve the overall efficiency of our economy. If you permit, I will just very quickly run through a few points which come under this category when we talk of improving the efficiency. Firstly, a new law has been enacted by the Parliament very recently after the budget was presented. It's for targeted delivery of financial and other subsidies. There was a lot of duplication, there was a lot of diversion of the subsidies, there was a lot of loophole in the whole delivery mechanism. So government has now gone for a legally backed biometric-based identity number for every individual beneficiary of government schemes. Whether you get a benefit out of government subsidies or you do not get a benefit out of the government subsidies, through a biometric process, each individual is given a particular number, and the subsidy delivery is done directly to the bank account of those individuals. So the duplication, the overlap in subsidy disbursement has been eliminated, and by this targeted delivery of services, we expect huge amount of savings to take place, and also to ensure that the benefit of the subsidy reaches the people for whom it is targeted. Secondly, we found that in our banking, in our financial sector, we did not have a robust bankruptcy law. We did not have a robust insolvency and bankruptcy law. The government has now introduced a bill in the parliament, and we are going to have a very robust bankruptcy law, which will be of great assistance to both for banks and even for corporates which are in distress, to sort of achieve a process of resolution of distress of corporate entities. We also found that in the public-private PPP partnership projects, especially in infrastructure, we found that many projects were stalled, were held up because there was no mechanism for dispute resolution. We are now coming out with a new law for dispute resolution in PPP projects, or projects where there is private participation, and projects which are essentially driven by public authorities. Fourthly, we have also transformed, the government is in the process of transforming, or I would rather say it has transformed the microfinance ecosystem. We had large number of microfinance institutions which were charging very high rates of interest. Now government has announced, and over the last 2 years, under the concept of Mudra Bank, this provides micro to micro level entrepreneurs. This provides easy credit in terms of availability and in terms of very competitive interest rates. So that is bringing about a huge amount of transformation in the ecosystem in that area. The startup ecosystem also is being significantly liberalized, and we are providing a ecosystem for the startup companies, because we see that there is a whole body of young entrepreneurs in our country who are hungry to make investment and start small enterprises. So the ecosystem for startup companies, for startup entrepreneurs, has also been considerably liberalized. In agricultural marketing, we found that there were a lot of bottlenecks and there were restrictions on starting of agricultural markets. Now the government has announced and launched a national e-platform for agricultural marketing, and some old laws which were enacted by the provincial governments. It has been made mandatory that if the provincial governments, if the state governments carry out the necessary amendments in those acts, in those laws called the APMC Acts, then they would be able to participate in this national e-platform for agricultural produces. I must also mention, I think other participants have talked about declining crude prices and how each country has dealt with this declining crude prices. For some, it has meant a loss of tax revenues. For some, like India, it has obviously given us more opportunities for more fiscal space. In India, what we have done is that every time there has been a decline in crude prices, the government has allowed part of the prices, of course, to pass on to the market for the consumers to utilize it. But government has also very opportunistically raised the tax level from time to time, and we have mopped up considerable amount of tax revenue. And the entire tax revenue so mobilized is earmarked for infrastructure sector, especially for roads and railways. And this has enabled the government to step up the public investment in infrastructure, particularly in roads and railways, quite significantly in the last 2 years. Lastly, I would like to mention another measure which the government has announced, and with this, I think the entire licensing system, or in the old days, as they used to call, the license Raj. For doing anything in the country, you needed a license. And the process of elimination of these licenses started in 1991. But the last vestige of this license system was in the transport sector. And in this year's budget, the finance minister has announced elimination of a requirement of license for running transport facilities, especially for passenger traffic. So there is a slew of measures which the government has announced. The whole effort is to make our economy more efficient, to create more jobs for our youngsters through more investment, through more startup enterprises, through more micro-level enterprises, and last but not the least, again, the whole foreign direct investment regime has also been liberalized, and almost everything today is put on the automatic route. More than 92 to 93% of the investment into the country, the FDI into the country, comes through the automatic route, and that we expect will add a lot of investment into the manufacturing and into the infrastructure sector. So I will stop here and would be very happy to interact with the members of the audience and with the distinguished panelists.
You've covered everything. I don't think you've left anything for anybody to ask you.